this is the.
You about ready, David?
I know the date because it's my anniversary today. So.
Oh, happy anniversary! Happy anniversary to Vicky.
Happy anniversary.
Thanks. Yeah, she's a really nice wife. I feel very lucky. We've been together almost 28 years. It's a long time. So, and we still like you. We still talk to each other. We still like each other. So
that's wonderful.
Yes, I consider her my best friend. So that's kind of nice.
Okay, David's booting up his computer.
Okay, I'll give him a minute and then we'll start.
Give him another minute.
I know Joe wants.
Hi, Charlotte.
Hi, Charlotte. I want to make sure we get done on time because Joe wants to get to his family.
Okay.
So I'm going to just officially open the meeting. I don't have a bell, so I'll just go ding. And we'll start with our affirmation with Rick.
We'll call it a invocation or something. But if we would bow our heads for a moment, a prayer. Lord, thank you for the day you've given us. Thank you for the rain we had. And thank you for the many blessings that we have to be able to go out and do good in the world through Rotary. Let us use our talent just in the best way possible. Give us guidance through our leadership in Rotary International and locally. And thank you again that we may be able to do this. All these things we ask in his name. Amen.
Thanks. So did you want to do the pledge, Linda, or you want me to do it?
Go ahead and do it.
Okay. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United
States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So now we're officially started. Thank you, Rick. That's good. I like that. Linda, did you get those notes that you were looking for from David or not?
No, I did not, but most of it was just in the future. The only thing that was upcoming was the Leadership Summit at Collin College on September the 29th.
Right.
And that's an Interact.
And we don't really do much with Interact, so it probably won't affect us.
And it's fun to see the students.
Yeah.
And let's see, on polio, there's 13 cases. There hasn't been any more cases in 2 weeks. So
that's good.
Afghanistan is at 10 and Pakistan is at 3.
Wasn't there one in South America?
It was the virus, it was a drug, the vaccine deal. It's not considered, it's not a wild virus.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, I guess that's good news then. So that's our introduction. Let me see if your email came in, Joe, so I can give you a decent welcome. And if not, I'll let you do it if I don't see it. Oh, there it is. Perfect. Joe's just got me his bio. So let me read Joe's bio. He's our speaker tonight, and I want to thank him for volunteering. He specializes in helping schools and businesses master the art and science of high performance feedback. He's an award-winning educator and instructional leader. He spent more than a decade in K-12 and higher ed markets, training, coaching, and empowering teachers and school administrators to differentiate instruction design, project-based learning, and bolster student support. Based on his 2017 book, The Feedback Fix, Joe has shown clients like Gates Foundation and members of the armed forces how to boost creativity, foster collaboration, and deeper self-awareness. He's a frequent keynote speaker, a TEDx presenter, a columnist for Inc., and has appeared in publications like Wall Street Journal, Educational Leadership, Edutopia, and other major outlets. Along with his wife and 4 boys, Joe lives in Dallas and virtually at Joe Hirsch, HIRSCH.me. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Joe, and I'm going to mute my microphone, Joe, so that you don't get any noise or background from me while you're presenting.
Well, thanks so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be learning alongside you today as we take a closer look at how leaders can transform the performance of their teams by thinking differently about the way they give performance feedback. Now, if you're like most people, you probably have a complicated relationship with feedback. Many people don't like getting it and even more dislike giving it. But the fact of the matter is feedback follows us wherever we go. It comes up in so many of our everyday experiences, right? Whether to write a review for that new product we just bought online, or to take that 2-minute customer experience survey after getting off the phone with technical support, or to award stars to our Uber driver, or leave a tip for the barista who just served our latte. And of course, it doesn't end there. Feedback naturally follows us into the workplace, where that discomfort becomes even more pronounced. A number of recent surveys have confirmed what we've known for a while, and that is that managers don't like giving feedback and employees dread getting reviews, which is why it should come as no surprise that one recent survey of Fortune 500s done by CEB found that almost 6% of these companies have ditched ratings altogether, and why nearly 2/3 of them have already begun to redesign their performance management practices. Today, I want to make a simple argument. Feedback doesn't have to be a source of fear. I believe it can become a force for growth. And to show you how, I want to divide our learning into 3 parts. First, we'll take a quick lap through some of the brain research showing why traditional feedback may be failing you. Next, we'll explore a radical alternative that offers a completely fresh take on feedback. And finally, we'll identify 3 practical strategies you can put to work right away for more positive, more authentic, and more collaborative dynamics within your team. Now, because most of us have negative associations with feedback, it's important to understand the reasons and the context behind all of that. And as humans, we've developed an acute awareness of the threats in our environment. The survival instinct that we've developed over millennia has been pressed and honed. It's the reason why our ancestors were able to survive, and it hasn't gone away. Whenever we detect a threat, in this case, a threat to our social standing and sense of self, our brains trigger one of 3 responses: fight, flight, or freeze. We become oppositional and argumentative, and we avoid it altogether, or experience a sudden sense of powerlessness, none of which is particularly helpful. And what you see in front of you actually is what it looks like on a neural level. This is a scan of the brain at rest. The blue patches you see here represent cortisol, which is the stress-inducing hormone that floods our neural pathways anytime our threat awareness is raised. And in this particular case, it happens to be quite low. Here's a scan, however, of a brain with elevated stress, the kind you'd expect to see from someone whose threat detection is running wild. And for too many people, this is exactly what their brains look like when they are about to get feedback, especially when they sense some bad news coming their way. Stressed, scared, shut down. Look at the cortisol. Look at how it's spiked. We know that the parts of the brain responsible for creativity and executive function, the parts of the brain that we need to do our very best work and become our very best selves, those parts literally go dark when we get negative feedback. Researchers point to 3 reasons why. First of all, traditional feedback feels awfully judgmental. It often feels like the person giving the feedback is judging us unfairly. And that happens to not just be a feeling. There's actual evidence showing that rater bias is quite prevalent in many of our feedback interactions. It also leads to a condition psychologists have called learned helplessness, the habituated belief that no matter what we do or what we try, the outcome won't change, which causes us to simply stop trying new things to get better. And that, of course, leads to a final barrier, a fixed mindset about how we think about ourselves and our potential. But the biggest failure of traditional feedback isn't a problem of tone. It's a problem of time. It describes a past we can no longer change and focuses on events we can no longer control. That sets up what I call a conflict between the vision, how one person sees things, and the visible, the way someone else sees them. And there's this gap between perception and reality, which is tragic, really, because the person getting this feedback probably had no idea there was ever a problem to begin with. And the more time that goes by before that feedback arrives, the greater the distance between us and the event itself, and the more likely we are to have forgotten all about it. Neuroscientists call this the forgetting curve. And as you can see on the chart here, we begin to forget information the moment we learn it. And that information loss steepens over time. Most people will forget up to 70% of what they've learned within 24 hours, and as much as 90% of what they've learned within a week. By that time, 7 days later, it's like we've never learned it at all, which makes it all the more important that leaders give feedback in real time so that they can help their team interrupt the process of forgetting. There's simply no way people can improve if they can't recall the particular circumstances surrounding the issues that we are asking them to fix. And so for all those reasons, the toxic stress, the time lapse, traditional feedback is a very broken system. It holds people back. But if we want to move them forward, which every leader wants to do, then we need a process that also looks forward, feed forward. Now, that may sound like, I don't know, playing around with some words, some semantics, but it's much more like changing the entire narrative of feedback altogether. Feedback tells the story about who people are, the things they've said, the things they've done, the opportunities they've seized or missed. But feed forward tells a different story, not just who they are, but who they are becoming. The things they haven't yet said or done, the opportunities that haven't yet presented themselves. It is the space that is still unfolding. To me, it's like driving a car. When you get behind the wheel, there's a reason why the windshield is a lot larger than the rear view, for obvious reasons. When we're driving, we want the biggest view possible. So when we're driving people forward in our roles as leaders, we want our eyes on the road ahead. We want their eyes on the road ahead, and we want them to have the best view possible. Feed Forward delivers that view. But it's not just about telling people what to see. It's also about showing them where to look. And this is where Feed Forward gives people a better sense of direction. If you were to compare traditional feedback to Feed Forward, the differences in tone, in time, they become acutely pronounced. Feedback focuses on a past that you can't change. Feed Forward focuses on a future that you still can. Feedback focuses on the giver. Right? We'll talk more about that in a moment. Whereas Feed Forward talks about the receiver. Feedback is primarily focused on ratings and numbers, a linear view of who someone is. Feed Forward is focused on development, a much more expansive view of who that person is and what he or she brings to the table. And most importantly, feedback is happening only some of the time. It's scheduled, it's annualized, maybe it's quarterly. Feed Forward is something that can happen all of the time. In my book, The Feedback Fix, I broke Feed Forward down into a 6-part plan that I call REPAIR, and that stands for regenerates, expands, particular, authentic, impact, and refines. Feed Forward is especially helpful for regenerating your talent pipeline, for expanding the way people think creatively, for focusing on particular information, for holding more authentic conversations about performance, for making an impact on how people work, and for refining the way that teams work together. If traditional feedback is broken, well, Feed Forward is how we repair it. And to me, it comes down to a simple belief. If we want people to change the way they see themselves, then we need to change the way we see them. And that starts with knowing the difference between what I call a mirror holder and a window gazer. See, window gazers, they look out and they tell you what they see. And that's the only view that matters, the view of the gazer. And that's how it is with traditional feedback, which tends to be hierarchical and one-sided. But mirror holders, on the other hand, they aren't interested in what they see. They're more interested in helping others see it for themselves, for them to look in that mirror and for them to discover something that they might not have seen before. So in parts 1 and 2 of this webinar, we described the problems of traditional feedback, and we explored some possibilities of feed forward. But let's get to part 3, which is putting together a plan of action. 3 strategies leaders can use right now to make a positive difference in the way they handle not only these difficult one-on-one performance conversations, but also the way they lead their teams to creative success. Let's start with every leader's dilemma, and that's how to give critical feedback. And like we said before, managers really, really dislike giving negative feedback and tend to get uncomfortable when they have to be the bearer of bad news, which is why most people resort to the praise sandwich, which goes kind of like this, starting off with an initial compliment, followed by a critique, and then topped off with some more praise, other compliment. Compliment, criticism, compliment. You've given one before, you've probably received one before. The thing is, people resort to them often, and there's a good reason why. Fear. We're afraid of saying what's really on our minds, which happens to be the middle part of the sandwich, the criticism. So what do? We sandwich the negative feedback between 2 positives, hoping that it's not going to land as harshly with the person on the other side. But here's the problem. Research tells us that people tend to remember the last thing that they hear. Psychologists call that the recency effect. So when you serve up a praise sandwich, the receiver is probably only going to hear this, the compliments on both ends, not the criticism that you set out to deliver. That's a problem because you as the leader think you've done your job of giving feedback, but you actually have completely muted your message. And as far as the receiver is concerned, he or she has not heard the news or the information that is really important for them to understand and the change that you're hoping for them to undertake. I find that a more useful alternative might be something we call a feed-forward wrap. Instead of disguising criticism in the form of gauzy praise, with a feed-forward wrap, you bundle it with clear statements of what you see and feel. The wrap stands for what and where, reason, affect, and prompt. What and where, reason, affect, and prompt. So let's break it down. So first off, you want to give the feedback a name and an address. Instead of hiding the issue that brought you to this piece of feedback, state it up front. Say what's going on. Tell them what's happening and where you see it happening. So if you're giving feedback about John's behavior during meetings, let him know right away. Say, hey, John, I felt that you kind of took over that meeting today. Right, so now John knows the context right away, which will ease some of that tension and stress that comes with feedback overtures that we talked about before. Next, you want to establish a rationale. You want to give them a reason and why it matters. So you say to John, the reason I'm telling you this is because I couldn't get a good read on other people's ideas today during the meeting. Now that might be obvious, but providing a reason for our for our feedback and for the information we're sharing, it's super helpful because people oftentimes don't necessarily perceive our intent. And so by making our reasons and our rationale clear, it actually helps people better understand where we're coming from. And if they're reasonable and fair-minded, it's going to give them everything they need to know. And if I could just ask you guys to mute your mics until you log in, that would be awesome. Thanks so much. At this point, we now get to the all-important affect, which is the feelings that this has caused. And the fact of the matter is, people might reactively challenge what you say, but they are less likely to argue with how you feel. So when you position your feedback as an emotion, not a judgment, you are likely to be met with more receptivity and less resistance. So if you go back to John and you say, hey, I felt badly that more people didn't have a chance to speak up in the meeting, that removes the blame and the accusation from the conversation. You're still delivering your key point. You haven't compromised that, but you're making it an I statement as opposed to a you statement. I felt badly as opposed to you took over the meeting and took away people's opportunity to speak. And that makes quite a bit of difference in terms of the tone and the tenor of the feedback that you're sharing. So that's what and where, reason and affect. And finally, we come to the last part of the wrap, the P, which I believe is the most important part, and that's the prompt. What can actually be done about all this? And here's where you actively seek the other person's input and insight. You say to John, do you see where I'm coming from here? Now, one of two things is going to happen when you prompt John with that. He's either going to agree, he will understand the feedback that you've shared, in which case you can now move to further actions, again, with John leading the charge. Or he'll disagree. He will completely not see your point of view, which on the one hand may seem like a negative, but on the other hand, now you have clarity and you can really better understand his perspective and discuss his concerns and his understandings more collaboratively. Either way, you have made a meaningful attempt to reach a more positive future outcome, and you have done that as a partner, not as an adversary. Feed-forward wraps help us get what we want by giving others what they need. Targeted, specific feedback that actively involves the other party and moves things forward with clarity, authenticity, and trust. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that is going to be helpful in terms of giving real-time feedback, but what about those annual or quarterly reviews that require me to actually talk about someone's job performance? I mean, how am I as a team leader going to push my team to get better? And how will I know that we're on the right track? So this brings us to a second feed-forward strategy, one that empowers leaders to recast evaluation as a tool for development, something that I call the feed-forward interview. So instead of trying to capture performance at a single moment in time, the goal here is to trace the peaks and valleys of performance over time, the journey of work, if you will. And because I think of this journey, in terms of a continuous process, I think of the feed-forward interview as occurring in three overlapping stages: the summit, the trek, and the climb. Summit, trek, and climb. It starts almost counterintuitively with the end, the summit, the moment of peak, the time someone felt like they were doing their very best work. So you start the conversation by prompting the other person to pinpoint the summit of a recent work experience when they felt like they were on top or had just achieved something incredible. Now, your job here as a leader is to be a good mirror holder, like we talked about before. Listen carefully. Guide the conversation with follow-up questions as needed. And so you say, hey, so why does that moment stand out to you? How was that feeling different than the feeling you got from doing other parts of your job? And if I can ask you again, please mute the audio, that would be helpful to everyone listening in today. Thank you so much. When you do that, people will open up. Your job really here is to listen. Next comes the trek. This is where you try to uncover who and what made that moment possible. So even when we scale great heights, we rarely do it alone. There's always someone or something that made that possible, right? So drill into that.
Muted.
What?
Are you muted?
I don't have a microphone.
Okay, so once again, you want to ask questions here and listen carefully to the answers. Like, back to Johnny from before, hey, was there someone on your team who brought out your best? Was there something about this particular assignment that elevated you? The point of the track is to help the other person trace the steps that led to this moment of great professional satisfaction. Now that you've done that, you've helped someone uncover a moment of personal best and the circumstances surrounding it, it's time to move to the final and most important part of the interview, the climb. Now, remember what we said before. Feed Forward is about scripting a future that people can control. The goal is to get them to experience this sense of professional flow again in the future, to scale that success. So you say to that person, okay, Johnny, you told me about that time when you felt like you did your best work and identified who and what made that possible. So do you feel like you have what you need to do that again in the future? Maybe that means working on similar projects. Maybe that means redefining the scope or structure of your team task. It's very similar to the final stage in the wrap, the prompt, where you're prompting the person to shape a future plan of action. Because over here, if the answer is yes, if Johnny has everything he needs, then you can be pretty sure that he'll be able to scale that summit again without needing too much direct managing from you. And if the answer is no, then you as a leader can have a better understanding about what you can do to make sure that your team member can trek back up that mountain. Summit, trek, climb. This Feed Forward interview completely redefines performance conversations. Instead of focusing on deficit moments, you're shifting the focus to situations of strength. Instead of looking back at when people were at their worst, you look at when they were at their best and you help them look ahead to how they might become their best again. People leave these conversations not only relieved, but renewed. They feel like they've retained a measure of autonomy and choice in their professional planning. They feel heard by their managers. And most of all, they feel like they can move ahead with the confidence that comes that knowing they have done well before and can do well again. And guess what? You as the leader, you generated all of these benefits simply by holding the mirror and guiding that person to a new view, not only of themselves, but I would argue of you as well. So we've outlined two strategies for using Feed Forward to create more positive and developmental conversations one-on-one, but what about the impact on teams? So here, I would argue that Feed Forward can be a very useful tool for helping teams generate, refine, and execute ideas with creativity and coherence. And how do they do that? With something we call brainwriting. Now, if you've ever tried to brainstorm, which is what people typically do, you've run into a classic problem. The team member who takes over the entire process, leaving no room for anybody else. Before long, that person has drained all the time and energy out of the group, and you've heard from no one but that single person. Well, that's no good. So here's a novel approach. Instead of having everybody talk at once, focus on everybody writing at once. Brainwriting, a technique that allows teams to tap into the collective genius of every one of its members. I find it to be a simple but powerful way to raise the creativity quotient of everyone on the team, and it's a pretty simple thing to do. Here's how it works. When the group is gathered to pitch a new idea or solve a tough problem, give each person a note card and have them write down their idea. Okay, so instead of talking it out, write it down. Then collect those cards, shuffle them up, and share them back out to the group so that now each person has a new card written by another team member. There are only two caveats here. Number one, no guessing, right? Don't try to figure out whose card it was. And number two, no judgment. Don't dismiss the idea out of hand. Instead, each member has to enlarge and expand that idea by adding something to it. So by the time you're done brainwriting, you've multiplied the number of ideas and possibilities for future consideration. Better yet, you'll have enlisted the help and energy of every member of the team. I find brainwriting to be super effective because it really produces this feed-forward effect. There's equity, there's ideation, and there's teamwork. Everyone working together without judgment. If you would like a deeper dive into these and some other techniques that I have found to be particularly helpful in getting teams to work better together, I put out a weekly roundup of leadership resources that you can put to work right away. You can send a text to 66866 with the word fix it. That's fix it to 66866. And if you're worried about getting unwanted messages or spam from me, take it from this guy over here. That's my 5-year-old son who is waiting to have dinner with me. And he can vouch for me. I will not spam you. So fix it to 66866. I would be honored to share those resources with you to help you help your teammates. So let's go back to what we started by doing today. We started out by exploring the many reasons traditional feedback is failing us, right down to the neural level. We know that when we give people traditional feedback, not only can they not change the past, they can't remember it either, making traditional feedback a pretty much useless and stress-inducing exercise. Next, we proposed a feedback fix, something that we call feed forward, the future-looking feedback that is based on a 6-part repair plan. We talked about ways leaders can become mirror holders instead of window gazers and start to shift their focus from simply rating people to actually developing them and helping them maximize their full potential. And finally, we topped it all off with 3 strategies that help leaders lead, whether that's managing difficult feedback with a feed-forward wrap, empowering a team member with a feed-forward interview, or generating better ideas and teamwork through brainwriting. I want to leave you with 3 big ideas that I think neatly sum all this up. The first is describe, don't prescribe. Traditional feedback is a tool that is often way too focused on leaders telling others what to fix. We need a new tool, and that would be feed forward, a tool that helps leaders look forward and listen for signals that help others fix things for themselves. Describe, don't prescribe. Number 2, become a learn-it-all. When you give feedback, resist the urge to be the all-knowing leader who has answers for everything. Instead, try to gather as much information as possible by asking questions, listening attentively, and prompting others to find the answers they probably already have. And finally, number 3, fill other people's buckets. Most people, I find, want to get better. It's our job as leaders to help them do just that. We've got to provide opportunities for continuous improvement. We've got to help them fill their buckets. If we make feedback about development and not just evaluation, then we as leaders, we're going to end up filling their buckets rather than draining the human capital that exists within the teams that we lead. Ultimately, what this all comes down to is a matter of perception. Take this picture, for example. When you look at this man's face, what do you see? Do you see someone looking right at you or from the side? The answer, of course, is that it all depends on how you choose to see it. And so it is with human performance. We can choose to see it as a picture of the past, complete, unchangeable, unlikely to improve, or we can choose to see it as a vision of the future, unfinished, emerging, and ready to rise. Achieving a feedback fix is not easy, but if we're brave enough and bold enough to make that shift from feedback to feed forward, to stop seeing people for who they are and start seeing them for who they are becoming, then we won't just become better leaders. I think we'll become better people too. I want to thank you guys for being a part of today's learning. I want to wish you the very best in your professional journeys. And if you want to stay in touch, and I hope you will, here's how you can find me. You can send me an email, visit my website, or interact on social. Thanks again, everyone, and I appreciate the opportunity to learn alongside you today.
I'd like to thank you for speaking to our group tonight. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask Joe? You have to unmute your microphones if you want to do that. Remember to unmute your microphones.
I've unmuted. It was very informational, and thank you very much for sharing with us. We appreciate your taking the time, and we hope to hear from you in the future.
Yes, thank you so much.
I like the idea of the writing over the communicating. It's a good idea to have it that way where everybody can do something at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Slows things down.
Yeah, I like that. I thought that was very clever. Anyone else have any questions before we do our four-way test?
I have one question, Joe. I appreciate this very much, and your ways to remember some of these things with the words like repair. What was the R for in repair? I don't know if I got that correctly.
Regenerates. in terms of regenerating your talent pipeline. You help people get a more complete picture of who they are and help nurture their strengths,
Okay.
which ultimately will keep that talent pipeline flowing.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Great. I signed up for your thing, so thank you for offering that.
Thank you.
We're going to close out our meeting then with the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. First,
Is it the truth?
second, is it
Is it fair to all concerned?
Third, will
Will it build good friendships?
I thought it said, will it build goodwill and better friendships? No. And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Am I right? I thought I
Yes.
got it right.
You're right.
And fifth one is it fun? So thank you, everybody. Remember, Linda, I'm not sure if I'll be here next week or not. I don't know what time my flight will get in. If I get in on time, I will be here. But we do have a speaker.
Okay. And then also, would you send out a notice as to how people can view these online?
Yeah, I got I set it up on a YouTube channel. I thought I gave you the link.
Well, I didn't like the first one. I was terrible.
I can't help that. I just showed, I just put the videos there. I don't.
Well, I want to thank you guys again. I do need to go
Yes, go
catch
ahead.
dinner with my family. Thank you,
you.
Closing
everyone.
now anyway. Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
Bye-bye.
everybody. Take care. Bye.
Okay. Thank you. We appreciate you. Oh, there you are. Okay. I don't have anything else, so I guess I'll close the meeting.
Yeah. Take care.